God. Every time I sit down, it's like a surprise to me and everyone else. But maybe mostly just me, I don't know. Okay. Week 3. We're on week 3 of me being here watching this footage. I'm starting to get very tired. I had to cut my hair once. It went surprisingly well. So I think after all of this, I might have a new career in hair care. Um I know. Listen, it's a surprise to us both. There's a lot when you lock yourself away in a room for an extended period of time for whatever purpose, whether it be because you're character acting or because you're trying to stop a clandestine invasion of Earth by an alien race. You will learn a few things about yourself along the way. And I think for me, it's that outside of being a really, really good secret agent, I could very well be a hairdresser, and I'm excited. I'm excited to explore that in the future, assuming I don't die again. But for now, I'm Agent Prescod, and you are
Mary.
Mary. That's right. That's right. You think I write? I take a lot of notes. You'd think I would have remembered this by now, figured it out, but there's just a lot on my mind with the scrolls. I'm sure that you can.
Yeah, I mean you're busy with
I'm
the hair.
busy. I'm cutting hair. Okay, so there's a lot of important things going on. So you've received and cracked and uncoded, I assume, this week's batch of scroll footage, scruttage, and I'm just curious. What are your thoughts on it before I start breaking down my opinions?
Yeah, I mean I liked it. I don't know if I liked it that much more than like the last one necessarily. I liked it. I think the stakes got higher. That's always fun. I think the scene in the like museum or whatever when they all kind of turn into rabbits, that was like a very visually intriguing. I think it's kind of in the trailers, but it was still very cool to watch, and I think well done. And I mean that was just one little scene, but I did like it. It was memorable. I think we got, especially at the end, like big teases that I think are probably misdirect at this point. That's my own opinion. We can get into that. I think obviously we will also get into this, presumably like the death of Gaia raises questions as well. But I did like Fury and Talos. They were fun.
Yeah.
I saw someone compare them like an old married couple, and I was like, yeah, I like it. But I do think, and again, we can get into it, but briefly, like I'm so torn on how I feel about Fury in the show generally, because part of it's like the more I know about him, the less I think he's cool, and maybe that's because like the mystery was always part of cool. So that's been an interesting journey, but that was my journey.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think compared to the first 2 batches of footage that we reviewed, this is, I don't know, maybe my least favorite thus far, but I still. Okay, folks at home. I'm welcoming you back here to my least flattering angle. And that's because I think the Skrulls are onto us. I think they figured out I'm recording from this room, and they hacked into my mainframe, and they were listening in on our videos. They made a mistake, though, and I caught it, and I shut it down. But now I'm here recording, not on my laptop, but on my phone. So I have sent Agent
Was that me again? Oh, Mary.
Agent Mary. I've sent Agent Mary from the undesignated agency a lot of very top secret, well thought out encrypted notes, and Mary is going to decipher these with me for you and see if we can put together anything maybe we didn't see before. Mary, you're this nation's hero. You're this world's hero. Thank you for this.
What I'm here
now. Yes. Now, as I was saying, I think this batch of footage, perhaps not my favorite of the bunch, but still a good time to capitalize on what you were saying before. I feel I feel as though this show is making an effort to strip away everything we thought Fury was, which I find interesting. It's a very bold move on Fury's part to be so vulnerable in such a situation, such as this. I think that it's interesting. We can talk about it more later, but this idea that we're kind of discovering that this whole time everything we thought was Fury was the Skrulls, which is very interesting. Like you said, it kind of takes away that mystery, and it makes Fury feel like just a guy who's really good at one-liners. And I feel like that's a very interesting way for the show to have played out when you consider all of the viable options.
Yeah, I agree. And we will get into that. But let's go in order of your notes here. The first one I don't know at all, which is young pup is scared. Someone's young, I'm assuming.
Yes.
That the Skrull who was like hesitant.
Yes, it's the young Skrull from the beginning of the first episode. I enjoyed that they took the time to show that Gravik's way of running things and his right hand man there, Rogan or Jogan or whatever, that he is kind of in line with Gravik in the way he's treating other Skrulls and how manipulative they are. And you see, he just showed up here because this young pup, right? He just wanted a place to be. He wanted a cause to fight for, and you kind of see that this might not be it right off the bat. That's what that note meant. I thought it was very interesting, and I like that they've used this young guy as like a recurring way to show the way Gravik's army or militia or society or whatever, how it functions, who it's impacting, how it's impacting, without it just being Gaia, who is somewhat skeptical.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is sort of. I would have. To be fair, I don't really care, but I almost would have liked it if it was someone who was like already there, because obviously he showed up in the first episode. He's kind of new to the whole thing, but kind of maybe seeing someone who's been there and is going, "Ooh, wait, what's going on?" would be interesting too. But I agree. It's kind of like a built-in like question mark, sort of as it goes along. So, and it was interesting when he and the other guy were in the boat, the separate, whatever they were doing. I fully understand or paid attention enough, but because the first time I watched it, didn't pay attention enough to realize those were the two Skrulls, or both of them were Skrulls. So I was like, this guy really doesn't want to do something, and I realized it was him later. And I liked that, and I liked the like last minute abort and the one Skrull like goes to do it. It's like ripping it out. So he may get murdered.
A lot of undercover Skrulls in this episode. A lot of.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think your second one is Gravik enters the room just like Fury.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought, okay, I'm a guy who loves parallels in my security footage, right? And I think it's cool that Gravik's entrance into this episode, when he walks in, the doors opening to his silhouette outlined is the same way that Fury entered the series in episode 1, and I thought that was cool that him and Fury sort of have the same gravitas in the way they carry themselves, even when they're alone. But opposite sides of this secret invasion. So I just thought it was cool. And after this episode, my theory from last week that maybe he's like a little Fury follower at one point. I don't know, that might have been dampened. It still could be true. Who's to say? But either way, I feel like the show is very much intentionally playing them off of each other visually and thematically. And I made note of it because I thought it was interesting.
Yeah,
I made note of it, as you can see.
We talked about last time, like our theories on like Gravik maybe being like almost like a adopted son to Fury. And I agree, like we don't get into it much here, so I do think dampened. It's a fun way to put that. But I think we'll learn more very soon, just by the way the episode ended, like about at least Gravik and Fury's wife's relationship, which probably went towards Fury too. But before we get there, this one, all caps, Super Skrulls in parentheses, kind of sudden.
Yeah. So if anyone who's been consistently watching, because again, I don't know how everyone is seeing this, but if anyone has been seeing this footage or when it's released and people can see it, you'll know that in the previous session that we had, I theorized that that is what Gravik was making, or what in some literature is referred to as a super Skrull. And here in the cold open to this episode, they confirm it. It's not even subtle. He straight up says super Skrulls. But I felt like it almost felt out of place with the rest of the episode in that they don't really bring it up again. And it doesn't really play a role in this episode. It felt like they just kind of, like, Gravik just needed to say that so that people knew it was a thing, and then they went back to what they really wanted to talk about. I don't know. It felt like the last episode made it seem like there was going to be some sort of like slower build to the Super Skrulls, and then in this episode it just starts with him straight up just saying, "Look, Super Skrulls," and then we go to titles, and then it's not a thing anymore. So it felt like kind of rushed. Like I started getting flavors of that. Like, there's only so many installments of this footage, so let's get this in now. Like, we don't know where to put it, so here it is.
No, I agree. I was gonna say the same thing about how it felt like it's building up, and like we were talking about last week, other people were like kind of theories and like, you know, on the computer, like the different powers or whatever, and then it really just does go Super Skrulls bounce, you know.
Yep.
So, like, and I think, yeah, I had the same thought. So it was kind of cool, but it was also like, okay, you know.
Yeah, and it also felt like, I feel like at this point we kind of know, or like there's a really good chance we're not gonna get like the Avengers versus Super Skrulls, but Gravik straight up says like Earth's heroes are gonna react after this next thing that I do, so we need to have our own Avengers to fight them, which makes sense. And in the literature that I assume Gravik is pulling from, that's the exact reason that they make Super Skrulls, right? Is so that they can have their own Fantastic Four, their own Avengers, or whatever. But I think that the fact we kind of know that that's not going to happen almost sucks a little life out of that moment, where you're like, but you're not going to be fighting the Hulk, you know? Like, you're not fighting the Avengers, so it's almost anticlimactic that you've given this whole speech about how powerful you're going to be able to become as Skrulls. I don't know. Maybe that was just...
Yeah, sorry, I cut you off a little bit. Did I cut you off fully?
No,
okay.
Not at all.
I was just going to say, I agree. I think the line about Earth's heroes, normally, if you didn't know, or you thought, you know, Earth's heroes or whatever were actually going to show up, that would be cool. It's like a little tease, like, woo, you know, and then, but we're all like, you know, so it almost begs the question of like, what's the point of the Super Skrulls here? Which I think I kind of talked about last time of like, who they're going to fight. And I know your theory was Gaia maybe was going to be one too. We can get into that again, but what was I going to say? Oh, I lost my train of thought. But I generally speaking, I very much agree with that. And I think, oh, that was what it was. Don Cheadle, I guess, recently told, I don't know, some outlet that he's not like suiting up in this series. So if that's true, he's not even doing it. So it's like there's literally no Avenger, you know. So it is kind of a, yeah. It was.
I don't know who Don Cheadle is, but I'm gonna take your word for it.
Okay.
Based on context clues, I would assume this is some sort of government code name for Colonel James Rhodes.
Yeah, that's exactly.
But also, of course, Colonel Rhodes in an interview is going to say, "I'm not putting on the armor," because if he were to say he was, people would freak out. So it's like, people have lied to cameras before, so who's to say? But all in all, I don't think this is leading towards some giant Avengers versus Super Skrull battle. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. I almost think it would be funny if at some point Gravik just realized the Avengers weren't going to fight him, and he was like kind of sad about it. Like, he put in a lot of work for nothing, you know?
Yeah. I'm trying to think about the order here, because one of your notes later, because the scene is later, but he does tease the fact that he's got the extremis going on with his hand later.
Yeah, because we can I did write that down because we didn't see it till later in the footage, but we do see that he has clearly already turned himself into some sort of super Skrull, because we do see him fix his hand immediately with Extremis later in the episode. So Gravik at this point is the MCU's first super Skrull. He just hasn't gone all out. We don't know what he's fully capable of quite yet. Yeah.
Do we think he's the only one? Or did he
No. Well, I don't. It depends on if you think Gravik is the kind of guy who would experiment on someone else first. Like if he would force his right hand man to do it first, and then if he dies, then he knows I'm not doing it. But if the guy succeeds, then he's like, oh, cool, now I'll do it, and I'll be better than you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I wondered too, because he brought in the council,
Yeah.
the leaders' council, to yell super Skrulls in their face, right, and then cut away.
Right.
So I almost wondered, because it doesn't make it clear when Gravik became one. Was he already one?
Yeah.
He was talking to them, or was that the next step? So I almost wonder, maybe in theory. I mean, I think the series can only handle so many super Skrulls in it, but maybe some of those other big time Skrulls could be super Skrulls. But we'll find out. Maybe. Who knows?
Who knows? What's next on my complicated list of ideas?
I'm gonna group several of them together because they're all about Fury's wife. So we've got flashback to and then so we do have a flashback. We do see them not meet, but kind of, I guess, spark in their relationship at that restaurant in 1998. You've also written on here, quote, "Thanks for being hot. That's so nice of you." Which I agree, because that was such a weird scene. I'm like,
yeah, I wrote it to clarify. I wrote it that way because I thought it was weird, and I thought it'd be funny to just write it exactly how it felt.
Yeah, I wrote that like that. You're good. I also was just like, it's such a strange concept of human Skrull being in love, but it's very much the concept being, ooh, maybe look like a very attractive Earth person for me.
Yeah.
I mean, she did that momentarily too, but I caught that, and it made me think too. When we were introduced to her, kind of last episode, she has not been in Skrull form around him that we've seen, but she was just chopping vegetables like that. So that's also a weird vibe of just oh, is it just for him? Yeah. And then something you also wrote down, which I also picked up on, appreciate it. What is her name? Because he calls her Vara and then says something about Scylla later. So
yeah, and I was trying to think in my head, I think Vara is probably her Skrull name. Vara's her real name, but maybe Vara is just. I feel like Vara could pass as a human name, but maybe in their head they were like, that's too traditionally Skrull. So you need a human name that kind of is similar, similar length and vibe and syllables. What is the other name?
It's Scylla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. That doesn't feel any more human than Vara, to be honest.
It could be short for Priscilla, but why would he call her that if he knows her actual name too?
Especially when it's just the two of them in private. I don't.
So I also picked up that, and I was just like, what? It's the very mysterious organization that he no longer, I guess, works for, because he was fired, but we still don't really know what that is.
What does she do? Does she have a job?
I can't.
Does she have a human job? Did she
pretend? That was her job. Pay attention. But
wait, what was her job?
They said she became a widow in Fury's.
She became a widow.
Yeah. And so, okay, that does. So we do learn about Fury just straight up, more or less abandoning his wife for many years.
Yeah.
He was dead for 5 years after, basically leaving all the time anyway.
Yeah, I don't know what I wrote for that, but I do remember making.
Fury left his all caps wife behind? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Did he ever visit? Question mark. I don't think he did.
I don't think he did. I wrote that note before their conversation about it, and then I was like, nah, I don't think he did.
I mean, she was pissed, which she should be, Yeah,
that's why, because then it starts to make me think, right? Again, I don't have a wife or family or friends. just or free time or much food left in my rations. But I would feel like if I was married to someone, it'd be kind of weird to be like, all right, peace, and then just leave for like years.
Yeah.
You know, that's crazy. That's a crazy thing to do to someone. And it almost made me think like, were they even actually married? Or was it like for a brief second, the way he was treating her made it seem like them even being married was part of like a double cover of some kind. But then she seemed really upset about it. I don't know. Their relationship is weird and complicated.
Yeah.
I made several notes about it. More questions than answers at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's part of like, to your point, I'd like to think this series like building a bunch of things to then like rip the rug out from it. So like your whole double cover thing, like I kind of like the idea of like learning that later. But at the same time, my issue with it, kind of like what I said before, it's just like the more I learn about Fury, I'm like, I don't really like this guy that much. Like,
Yeah,
especially if he's just a shitty husband. Who wants that, you know?
yeah.
And it's just odd. I still feel like there's this lingering question, which I think has somewhat been answered, but like, why did Fury go away for so long? Why did he come back? I think the comeback is presumably the Scrolls thing starting from what we saw in the first episode. But, and then the leaving was also presumably because he kind of freaked out after the blip. But it's like,
Right.
people keep bringing it up in this way of like, I feel like there's some other event or something that
Right.
I could be wrong, but it's still just like presented as like this very like mysterious thing.
Let me throw this at you really quick. I have very much enjoyed this being, like I say every week, like Nick Fury the show is sort of what it feels like. And in that way, like we are tearing away all of the intrigue Nick Fury has had for decades. We find out again, I probably made a note about it. We've already mentioned it. Like the Skrulls, Talos sort of reveals that every major accomplishment Fury's ever had was kind of more or less the Skrulls, and he was just like the face of them for decades in the world, which I think is cool. I like that, but it does tear away some of his mystique, and you're like, oh, can he actually do anything if he doesn't have like Talos helping him secretly the whole time? We see that he's not a good husband. We see that he has all these panic attacks. It's great. I love it because it makes him seem more human in a lot of ways. But my follow-up question is, I do get a little bit of internet access, at least enough to record these and look at Twitter. And on Twitter, I did see, I don't remember who it was, but someone had tweeted out that this is very accurate to how Fury is in literature, like how people have seen him for decades and decades and decades, and that he is kind of a jerk, and he is willing to screw over people who don't deserve it and who are close to him if he feels like it's for the best of the world or for the best interest of himself or whatever. That is very Fury of him. But normally he's in a scenario where like Captain America is there to be like, Nick, or I'm sorry, Fury. No one calls him Nick. What are you doing, man? You kind of look like a jerk right now. And it's like, oh boy. And you have that conflict, and Fury's almost like almost the bad guy, but in this show he has to be like the good guy. And it's hard to do normal Fury things and also have him be like the protagonist, because it's harder to then question, to reasonably put him in his place. I mean, the show's still doing that in a very real way, but like you said, now you have a protagonist where you're like, do I even like this guy anymore? And I was wondering your thoughts on, like, do you think that this Secret Invasion footage would have been better off if there was another character that wasn't like Talos? Like if there was, even if it was just Rhodes and wasn't a Skrull, but like War Machine was there with them to be like, dude, what are you doing? I know, and again, I know that happened in the last batch of footage, but you get what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, big fan of Rhodey, so would have been great. But I mean, it's interesting. I just feel like it feels like a farewell of the character to some extent. Like it kind of seems
Right.
like it's capstone project in this post Infinity Saga world. Like Black Widow got this movie later. Like this almost feels like that kind of ending. And so it's weird to like have him torn down for that, because I think it's realistic. He's older in the universe and real life. And we have seen him cool, doing the stuff. So it's different, but it's also like, I don't want it to end on like Fury, the like agile old man who
Yeah.
can't do anything, and all we learn is he didn't actually earn anything. Like, that's just kind of like a lame way to end, I think, the character that's been so iconic in the whole MCU.
Like how the famous line from, I think it was Tony or Steve or someone in the footage we call the Avengers, is like, he's Nick Fury, his secrets have secrets. That's how people have always thought of him. Like, he's always 3 steps ahead of everyone. But now it just turns out the guy you always admired, because the guy I've always idolized because his secrets have secrets, it turns out the secrets are just 19 scrolls that are like everywhere. Which, again, I do like to an extent, but it is kind of a sad ending if that really is it,
Yeah, and it's weird because we're now we're halfway through it.
Yeah.
And it's like nothing has like turned in that regard. If anything, it just keeps turning bad for Fury, instead of like, oh, he's getting over his little old man vibe and, becoming, that's where I thought it was going. I guess it still could, but it's like, how much do we have for this? And I agree with the scrolls point. Like, it's interesting and it makes sense. I do like how the scroll being his like, entire web of information makes sense and like actually does explain how he could do a lot without too many crazy questions. But the way that conversation plays out, which I do like from Talos's perspective a lot.
Yeah. It's great work. It's great character work for Talos. But now you're like, oh, so Talos is actually Nick Fury, like, this whole time.
I know. And that's what he really like brings him down a notch in that conversation. And I don't know. It's not that I don't like the concept of it. It's just like, to my point.
It's weird.
Yeah.
We're going to have to, in my opinion, it's like, it could either be genius or a really bad move, but we're going to have to see how it plays out going forward. Like, if they can capitalize on it in a really interesting way, then I think it could be really great. But otherwise, it's like, it is kind of just sad.
Yes. Okay.
Making my way through this extensive coffee. I've been up all night theorizing about who might be a Skrull. I know it's not you, but someone out there is a Skrull for sure.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to group some of these together, but kind of go chronologically, I think, in the episode. But
they do, yeah.
We do get a scene with Talos and Gravik at the museum.
We do.
Yes. Which has a few different things in it. We talked about the extremis kind of being the tease at the end, and I mentioned at the beginning the like cool scene where they all like get up and they're all Gravik, blah blah blah. That's just kind of cool to watch. But it is interesting because that was kind of about Gaia, but not at the same time. At the end, he's like, "Hey, my daughter's name out of your mouth," which is like he works with her, That's just practical. Doesn't make sense. But so what are your general thoughts on that whole?
I thought it was good. You brought up earlier, I did like that as another show of Gravik's power and how every time you think, oh, like one of the characters has Gravik in a situation where they might be able to get him under control a little bit, you find out, nope, Gravik was still a step ahead of you. He still is. Again, those parallels with Fury, like Gravik is the one in this show who is always seemingly 3 steps ahead. And, they go in and they're having this conversation and Talos is kind of getting to like flex his muscles a little bit. And then there's that really, which it was in some of the pre-footage, or as you referred to it, trailers, of like Talos being in a room full of Skrulls that all turn to look like Gravik. But I think that it's even better in context of the scene, because it is that moment where you as the viewer is like, oh shit, this guy he knew what was going to happen. He knew how Talos was going to be. I don't even know if he picked the location or not. I don't really remember, but like he is steps ahead, and he reveals that to Talos in this really terrifying, effective way. And all of them turning into Gravik specifically too is you have a whole room literally show you exactly who they are allied with and who their allegiance is sworn to without saying a word, because they literally turn into him and they all just stare at Talos. Like, Gravik is everywhere. He is watching. And it's one of the only moments in this episode, I think, where I truly felt that anyone could be a Skrull. Who do you trust? Vibe really came out in that scene, and I liked it a lot.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really wish the rest of the series like was closer to that level of just that scene. And I get that was a cool scene, great, but it's like that had a great intensity and like
Yeah.
to your point, like it met the whole vibe of who. Yeah, right, exactly. And I wish kind of the other scenes were like bringing themselves up.
The show goes back and forth between, like, because it is Nick Fury the show, but it also is still trying to be Secret Invasion because that's the title. But it's like some of the scenes when Fury isn't there, like my scene in the first batch of footage before I had to fake my own death and get out of there, was like that had that who do you trust intensity vibe where like Fury's not really involved, but you have these two other characters and they're arguing over it, and like that's when it reaches those heights. And like that's not to the detriment of Fury per se. It's just like it does sometimes feel like there's kind of like two shows happening.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Once you just mentioned that first scene, I'm like, this was the same show. Obviously it was, but it almost seems like so
Yeah.
right now. Yeah. So I agree with that. I think the next general topic, the main issue, conflict, or whatever, I think in this episode, or the big one, was the planned strike on the UN target. And I think we get, on one hand, Fury and Talos, going to get the guy, and we got the Skrulls doing the work to actually do it. And then we've got Gaia on her end. So that whole plot, there we go. Interesting. I'll take your thoughts on that. I think I said earlier, I liked that it was high conflict. Did I think they were actually gonna nuke someone in this show at that time? No, but it was enough of like a risk in my mind that it was like engaging. And I do think part of the scene with like the I don't know, the British government guy who was doing it from his home that they broke into, Bob. That was so much more about like Fury and Talos than it was the actual plot, which was fun.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I like that you said that, because I was going to ask you a follow-up question that is kind of in line with that, which is, again, this is, I think, the first batch of footage where I saw vague online reactions before I was able to really review like the whole batch of footage myself. And another one that I saw that I found interesting was someone commenting on that, like, there's this really high state, like they're going to potentially drop nukes. Like it's real bad, could be real bad for a lot of people. And in a traditional spy movie or spy series or whatever with like this big action star, you might see Fury and Talos are like in a security base and there's like action going on, and like this guy's a Skrull and then this guy's not a Skrull and then blah 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 blah. But this show once again takes a more grounded approach in it. So instead of all that, you have, in a completely different environment venue, it's Fury and Talos at this like guy's house in London on like his home laptop trying to figure it out. It feels like some people might really like that, and they might be like, yeah, the show's not really about what's happening. It's still about Fury and Talos. So that's what this scene is, and they've set it in a way where that can happen. But at the same time, do you think that takes away from the intensity of it? Like that takes away from the who do you trust? There's this a nuke is going to drop urgency,
Yeah, for sure. It definitely is a big contrast to what we would have seen. I don't know, because people want to compare this to the Winter Soldier, and Winter Soldier, I think, in scenes like that or similar to that, like it was much more like, this is serious, like this is a big deal, this has consequences. And here it's like, we know it does because it's very obvious, but it's like they really don't go into sort of that mindset or that vibe or that pacing of it. Like you're not on the edge of your seat, really. You know, it's not like a
Right.
moment there, but it didn't work out. But we do learn. Well, Gravik learns out. That's a phrase.
He learns out.
Yeah, Gravik figures out that Gaia, was feeding information to Talos through this as she was trying to get away, and we do see him presumably what looked like kill her. And so that, in theory, is a big moment. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I don't know if Gaia is actually a goner here in this moment, then I will be a little disappointed. Only because I feel like she was barely even in this episode. So if she's actually dead, which I mean, she changes back into Skrull form, which is usually an indicator that they've actually died. But it's not like she couldn't have just thought fast and switched back to a Skrull to like make it look like she was dead. I think it's a fake out because I do think that the show is at least smart enough. This batch of footage is at least smart enough to have Gaia in it more if they were going to eliminate her from the show like that. At least give a slightly more dramatic ending. So I'm going to go on the assumption that Gaia is not dead and that there's more to come with Emilia Clarke. Whether it be, Gaia's dead, but Emilia Clarke comes back as like whoever she was impersonating, or she did fake her death, or I don't know. I'm going to assume there's more of her. So in that case, what that scene really serves to do is like one last show of, that scene becomes more for Gravik than it does for Gaia, and that she begins pleading with him, and you think for a brief second, there's going to be like, she's going to put him in his place at the very least verbally, and then he just shoots her and walks, like totally doesn't care. One of his best, most important operatives, and he's like, yep, you're dead, doesn't matter, out of here. And then he leaves. So if you view it from that perspective, I think that it becomes a very cool moment for Gravik. If it turns out that this is Gaia's final scene and she's dead, then it becomes a lot worse, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. It makes no sense that Emilia Clarke would have been like, like one, her salary must be pretty high for just who she is. So what, it just seems like a weird character to be like, yep, join the MCU. You're going to be in 2.2 episodes and then just die. An unceremonious death, even though her presence and her relationship to Talos is such like a big thing so far in the series. Like that's correct. Whether or not she's doing that much, like that concept.
Well, she's like the middle, like she serves a purpose, in the same purpose in this story that like Spider-Man did in Civil War in like literature, is that like she's like, there's a war going on and she's the middleman. She's the one who's like going, because of Gaia, you get perspectives from both sides. So she does play a really important role in this footage, for sure.
I do think, I think a lot of people probably have the same thought. It just seems like a way the character, also the actor. But so I agree. I thought maybe someone else as a Skrull was being her, and then when he killed her and kind of looked at her body, he doesn't say anything or do anything, but he could have like been like, oh, that's not her, and just kind of walked off, and we'll learn that next time. Or to your point, she could have faked her death. I didn't think about that, but that makes sense.
Okay, so once again, our feed has been hacked by Skrulls. No one is safe. I don't know what's happened to Agent Mary. I hope that she's okay. She'll probably be okay. It's probably next week that we'll see her again, and we're gonna find out 100% she's okay. But for now, we don't know, and we don't know who we can trust, because that's the vibe of all of this. We don't know. One last important point to make before we let anyone watching this go. The phone call at the end of the episode. Maybe the biggest thing. It makes sense the Skrulls would want to take us out before we talked about this and brought this up to anyone else. It seems like Rhodey, Colonel James Rhodes, War Machine, is a Skrull. At the very least, he's working with the Skrulls. He knows Gravik. He's meeting with Fury's wife. Is he a good Skrull? Is he a bad Skrull? Is Fury's wife working for Gravik? Probably this is probably a heartbreaking revelation, or going to be a heartbreaking revelation for one Nicholas J. Fury. I'm curious to see how it's going to play out, but it's terrifying. This goes back to, we heard Colonel Rhodes call Fury Nick in their meeting in the last batch of footage. So, you know, as Fury points out in this batch of footage, nobody calls him Nick. We all call him Fury. So, you know, it's in the pudding. We see it. I'm excited to see how this plays out. It's going to be really terrifying. God, I'm so scared, but I'm also not scared at all of these scrolls, because if anyone's gonna stop them, it's me. It's me and Agent Mary, who I'm sure is fine. I'm sure this is not a bad sign for Agent Mary at all. Trust me, I'm really good at reading signs and knowing when they're bad and when scenarios are gonna play out poorly for somebody. I'm kind of an expert on that. So until next week, I have been Agent Prescod. Please let us know if you have any theories. If you see this footage, try to contact me, please. Someone's gotta do it, because it doesn't seem like Fury or Talos are getting it done. So this has been me, and it was Agent Mary. I salute you, soldiers.